The cold gray light before dawn on March 6, 1836, a 26-year-old lieutenant colonel named William Barret Travis stood on the crumbling north wall of an old Spanish mission in San Antonio de Bexar. He was watching thousands of Mexican soldiers form up in the darkness, their bayonets catching the first hint of light. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and gunpowder. Travis had maybe 180 men left, most of them exhausted, half-starved, and running low on powder. He knew exactly what was coming. He had known for days. He had written it in letter after letter, in ink that was still wet when the messengers rode out. The enemy was too big, help was too slow, and if the colonies didn't wake up fast, every soul inside these walls was going to die. The rest of Texas heard him. They just didn't listen. Or maybe they couldn't bring themselves to believe that this hot-headed young lawyer from Alabama could see the future clearer than they could. To understand how Travis got to that wall on that final morning, you have to go back more than a decade earlier to a different kind of battlefield, one that had nothing to do with cannon fire and everything to do with pride, debt, and a restless ambition that never quite fit inside the lines others drew for him. William Barret Travis was born on August 1, 1809, in the Red Clay Hills of Saluda County, South Carolina. He was the oldest of 11 kids, and from the jump he carried himself like someone who already knew he was meant for bigger things. When he was 9, the family followed an uncle to Alabama, settling near Sparta. Young Buck, that was his nickname, got himself a decent education at Sparta Academy, drilling in Greek and Latin, history, mathematics, the kind of classical schooling that made a boy believe he could argue his way into greatness. He taught school for a while in Monroe County, even fell for one of his own students, a girl named Rosanna Cato. They married in 1828 when he was barely 19. A son, Charlie, came the next year. On paper, it looked stable. Travis opened a newspaper, the Claiborne Herald, and studied law under a local judge. But paper and ink didn't pay the bills. He bought slaves to work land he couldn't afford, borrowed money he couldn't repay, and watched the Herald fold by the end of its first year. Creditors closed in. By 1831, he owed more than $800, a small fortune back then. Court records show the humiliation. He was dragged into a hearing, forced to plead that he was still technically a minor when some of the debts were signed. The judge wasn't impressed. Travis walked out of that courtroom a marked man. So he did what a lot of ambitious, broke Southern men did in those days. He left. In the spring of 1831, he crossed into Mexican Texas, promising his wife and child he'd send for them once he got on his feet. He never did. He started over in the little settlement of Anahuac, hanging out Ashingle as a lawyer for the Anglo settlers who were pouring in. The place was tense. Mexican authorities were cracking down on immigration, trying to enforce taxes and customs, and quietly moving toward ending slavery in Texas, the one institution most of the new arrivals had come to protect. Travis smelled trouble and leaned right into it. He represented slave owners in court, helped organize local militias, and in 1832 he pulled off one of the more audacious stunts of the early unrest. He and a friend sent a fake letter to the Mexican commander, Juan Davis Bradburn, warning that 100 armed men from Louisiana were coming to seize runaway slaves Bradburn was holding. Bradburn panicked, called out his troops, and when nothing showed up, the whole thing blew up in his face. Travis got arrested for it, spent time in the stockade, and walked out more convinced than ever that Mexico's grip on Texas was slipping. By the summer of 1835, the revolution was no longer a whisper. Travis led a small force that captured Mexican soldiers at Anahuac without firing a shot, disarming them and sending them packing. It was a bloodless win, but it made his name. The provisional government noticed. They commissioned him lieutenant colonel of cavalry and put him in charge of recruiting. Governor Henry Smith ordered him to reinforce the small garrison at the Alamo under Colonel James Neal. Travis didn't like it. In a letter to Smith, he wrote, "I am willing, nay anxious, to go to the defense of Bexar, but, sir, I am unwilling to risk my reputation by going off into the enemy's country with such little means, so few men, and with them so badly equipped. That single sentence tells you everything about what Travis already understood in January 1836. He wasn't some wide-eyed volunteer charging blindly toward glory. He was a realist who could count men, powder, and distance. He knew the mission was undermanned and under-equipped. He went anyway. On February 3rd, he rode into San Antonio with just 18 regulars. James Bowie had arrived a couple weeks earlier with 30 volunteers. The two men shared command uneasily at first, Bowie the knife-fighting legend, Travis the by-the-book officer. But when Bowie fell ill with what was probably pneumonia or typhoid, Travis became the sole commander. He got to work. He had the men strengthen the walls, mount the few cannons they had, and scout the roads leading into Bexar. What his scouts brought back wasn't encouraging. Santa Anna was moving faster than anyone in the Texas government wanted to believe. The Mexican general had marched his army north through the winter, covering ground that most military men thought impossible in February. Travis started writing. On the afternoon of February 23rd, the day Santa Anna's advance force appeared on the outskirts of town, Travis sent his first urgent note to Judge Andrew Ponton in Gonzales. The enemy in large force are in sight. We want men and provisions. Send them to us. We have 150 men and are determined to defend the Alamo to the last. Give us assistance. He added a postscript that shows how seriously he took the chain of information. Send an express to San Felipe with news night and day. He wasn't just asking for help. He was trying to wake up the entire colony. That same day, he and Bowie co-signed a letter to Colonel James Fannin at Goliad. We have removed all the men to the Alamo, where we make such resistance as is due our honor. In this extremity, we hope you will send us all the men you can spare promptly. They had 146 men, little food, but enough, they said, until relief arrived. Travis already suspected Fannin might not move fast enough. The next morning, February 24th, with the bombardment already underway, he sat down and wrote the letter that would echo across Texas and beyond. Addressed to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, it is only a few hundred words long, but every sentence is a warning wrapped in defiance. I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion, otherwise the garrison are to be put to the sword if the fort is taken. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Then the call. Then I call on you in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and everything dear to the American character to come to our aid with all dispatch. The enemy is receiving reinforcements daily and will no doubt increase to 3,000 or 4,000 in 4 or 5 days. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his own honor and that of his country, victory or death. A postscript added the human detail that makes the whole thing ache. They had started with almost no corn, but had since scavenged 80 or 90 bushels from abandoned houses and driven in 20 or 30 head of cattle. Travis wasn't painting a picture of heroic starvation. He was showing that even in the middle of a siege, they were still improvising, still holding on, still waiting for the rest of Texas to catch up. He kept writing. On February 25th, he sent a detailed report to General Sam Houston. He described the enemy's entry into Bexar, the failed surrender demand, the first skirmish where 200 or 300 Mexicans had advanced under cover of houses only to be driven back by grape and canister shot. "We have not lost a man," he wrote proudly. David Crockett, who had arrived with a dozen Tennessee volunteers, was seen at all points, animating the men to do their duty. But the warning was clear. I have every reason to apprehend an attack from his whole force very soon. If they overpower us, we fall a sacrifice at the shrine of our country. Give me help, O my country, victory or death." He sent another express to Fannin, and another. Couriers slipped out at night, Albert Martin, John Smith, James Bonham, riding hard toward Gonzales, Goliad, San Felipe. Travis was tracking Santa Anna's numbers with the precision of a man who knew the difference between hope and reality. He estimated the force in front of him at 1,500 to 6,000, and growing. Historians now know he was right on the money. Santa Anna had roughly 2,000 men with him when the siege began, with more columns closing in. Travis also understood the put-to-the-sword threat wasn't bluster. Santa Anna had made examples before, executing prisoners, refusing quarter to rebels. This wasn't going to be a gentleman's war. Here's what almost no one else in the scattered Texas leadership seemed to grasp at the same moment. The provisional government was in chaos. Delegates were arguing about whether to declare independence or keep negotiating with Mexico. Sam Houston was trying to build a real army out east and believed, correctly in the long run, that the smart play was to fall back, consolidate, and fight on ground of their own choosing. Fannin at Goliad had 400 men and supplies, but he was hesitant, waiting for clearer orders, worried about supply lines. Distance and winter roads made everything slow. A courier who left the Alamo on February 24th might not reach Gonzales until the 26th, San Felipe, days later. Travis knew all of this. He had been in Texas long enough to understand the distances, the politics, the rivalries. On March 1st, 32 men from Gonzales slipped through the Mexican lines under cover of darkness. It was the only reinforcement the Alamo ever received. Travis welcomed them, but he knew it wasn't enough. 2 days later, James Bonham rode back in after his latest mission to Fannin. He had no good news. Fannin had started out once, but turned back because of wagon trouble and weather. Travis wrote one last letter on March 3rd to the president of the convention, then meeting at Washington on the Brazos. He described the continued bombardment, the enemy trenches creeping closer, the desperate need for powder, balls, and men. He still sounded hopeful that the colonies would respond, but the tone had shifted. He was no longer asking politely. He was stating facts. By then, Travis had accepted what the letter writers back east still refused to face. The Alamo was not going to be relieved in time. The walls were too long, the garrison too small, the enemy too determined. He had maybe 10 days' provisions left if they stretched everything. Ammunition was critically low, and Santa Anna's blood-red flag flying over San Fernando Church made the terms unmistakable. No quarter. On the night of March 5th, Travis supposedly drew a line in the dirt with his sword and gave every man the choice to stay or try to slip away. Historians still debate whether the line drawing actually happened, but the choice was real. Almost every defender stayed. They had heard Travis's warnings for 13 days. They had read the letters. They had watched him refuse to surrender or retreat. They chose to stand with him. At 4 o'clock in the morning on March 6th, the Mexican bands struck up the Deguelo, the ancient melody that meant no mercy. 1,300 Mexican soldiers surged forward in 4 columns. The Alamo's cannons roared for a few minutes, then fell silent as the powder ran out and the attackers reached the walls. Hand-to-hand fighting raged for perhaps 90 minutes. Travis was among the first to fall, shot in the head while firing over the north wall. Bowie died in his sickbed. Crockett and the rest fought until the last man. By sunrise it was over. The defenders were dead. Their bodies were stacked and burned on Santa Anna's orders. But here is the part that still stings when you read the letters today. Travis had been right about almost everything. He had correctly gauged the size and speed of Santa Anna's army. He had understood that Fannin's column would not arrive in time. He had seen that the provisional government was too fractured to coordinate a rapid rescue. and he had recognized that holding the Alamo, even at the cost of every life inside it, would buy the rest of Texas the one thing they needed most: time. While the Alamo burned, delegates at Washington on the Brazos were finishing the Texas Declaration of Independence. Sam Houston, who had received Travis's desperate appeals, was already using the delay to pull his army together. Volunteers who read the victory or death letter poured into Texas from the United States. When Houston finally turned and fought at San Jacinto on April 21st, his men charged with the cry, "Remember the Alamo." Santa Anna was captured the next day. Texas was free. Travis never lived to see any of it. He was 26 years old. But in the weeks before the final assault, he had written himself into history with a clarity that still feels almost eerie. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't romanticizing. He was calculating, reporting, pleading, and finally accepting. He knew the walls were too long. He knew the reinforcements weren't coming. He knew what put to the sword meant. And he knew that sometimes the only way to make the rest of your people listen is to stand in the breach until they have no choice but to hear the echo. The Alamo fell. But the warnings Travis sent out on those desperate winter nights did not. They rode east on horseback, copied by hand, printed in newspapers, passed from settlement to settlement until the entire colony finally understood what one young commander had seen from the beginning. Texas listened too late for the men behind those walls. But it listened, and because it did, a republic was born in the space Travis and his garrison bought with their lives. That is what William Barret Travis knew before the Alamo. And that is why, even now, the rest of us still can't look away.